Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'll call the meeting to order. Turn to the right page first. Okay. So, it being the allotted hour, 6 p.m, I'll declare the meeting open and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and gather to conduct this meeting and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Kaya Marman, Kaya Yoga, Kaya Bridie, Yananuk, Nalak Kadij Niji Nalak Kadij Nija Bujabal, Wajak Nunga, Kora, Nijie Burawan. I don't believe we have any apologies for tonight. And councillors, I would ask if there's any declarations of interest. No, okay. As announcements, I'll just ask if anyone hasn't filled in the attendance book at the back, please do so before you leave. I'd also like to make an announcement that with the upcoming local government elections in October, residents and ratepayers can expect to receive their voting packs in the mail in late September or early October. Have your say by casting your vote. There will be 3 positions on council contested by 7 candidates. The information on those candidates is both on the town's website and it'll also be in the voting packs with information about how to vote. This will be the first year where there'll be preferential voting, and that has been introduced by the Department of Local Government, and so there will be some slight differences in how the votes are cast by you, the public. Petitions, I don't believe we have any petitions for tonight. Okay, this brings us to section 6, which is statements by members of the public. Now, what I'd ask you to do, if you have a statement, which is for 2 minutes, raise your hand. When I point to you, come to the microphone, state your name and address, and then if you have your statement, and up the top here, we have a clock, and that will tell you how far along you are in your 2 minutes. Thank you. So, do we have anyone in the audience who'd like... Yes, sir.
Is this on?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Is this right? Yes. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Adam Covell, 16 Lucan Way, Bassendean, current chairman of the Bassendean Community Men's Shed. We'd just like to address item 9.2 and make it very, very clear that we have never refused or rejected an application to hire the Bassendean Community Men's Shed to any group. We take umbrage at that suggestion. Why would we? We actually get the hire fee and we're not in the habit of refusing income. The way the issue is being addressed is having an impact on the health and well-being of a dedicated group of men who simply want a safe place to make friends, talk, share meaningful activities and strengthen the community. The officer's recommendation does not address the issue of low community group usage of the facility. It simply reacts to innuendo and hearsay and suggests that we are at fault, leaving the real issue unresolved. The officer's justification for their resolution is that the town has received feedback. I mean, this mysterious feedback, we're not too sure what the hell that is. It's on page 14 if you want to see the word feedback.
Sir, if you'd like to keep your statements modified, please.
Okay. The next part of the justification is anecdotal. And I'll just read out of the Oxford Dictionary. Anecdotal, of an account not necessarily true or reliable because based on personal accounts rather than facts or research. While there was much anecdotal evidence, there was little hard fact. I mean, and again, I won't worry about the next bit, but council has also an obligation to abide by the principles of natural justice, which you can actually see on page 4 of your document. The officer's recommendation must be based on facts. The decision seemingly based on innuendo and hearsay questions our integrity, tarnishes our reputation, and is quite distressing for our members. We don't enjoy being branded as villains. We're aware of our responsibilities under the lease and take all matters seriously. We do not need them, and I might add, they've emphasised them, and God only knows why they emphasise them in the document. There are many reasons why...
I'm just going to get you to wind up now. I'll give
Oh,
you
okay. All we're asking for then is that council withdraw the item and sit down with the men's shed's representatives and determine the real reason for the low hiring of the facility and develop a proper plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Statements, sir, if you come to the microphone.
Clive Brown from 2 Surrey Street in Bassendean, just down the road. As a men's shed, we are entitled to know the nature of the complaint. The extent to which the nature of the complaint is not raised with us is a denial of natural justice on the part of the men's shed to be able to respond. To talk about some vague complaint lodged at some time about something for which we are unaware and ask us to deal with that matter is just too much. Is just too much. And the council has an obligation to disclose to us, if that complaint is real, what it is. Not too much to ask. I mean, here at the council meeting, when we want to get up and speak, we're required to put down our name, our contact address and our email address. Well, if others are making a complaint against us, let them do the same. We're all big people here, and we don't get an opportunity to reply. And as you know, lots of things are said in casual conversation. Oh, I ran into someone and he told me that someone told him that this happened. Well, it's not fact. That is not fact. And we find it surprising, amazing, that this finds its way onto the council agenda. My goodness, if this is what the council is spending its time on, one wonders what you guys are really doing in terms of carrying out your instructions, your requirements to service the local community.
Mr. Brown, I would ask you not to be derogatory in your commentary towards the council. Mr. Brown, I'm the presiding person in this meeting. You're not in Parliament now. So I would ask you to please have respect in this room to the councillors and the people who are sitting in this room. And also this meeting is live streamed. So I would ask for respect in this chamber. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Anyway, I made my point. I don't need to go on any further. I thank you for the opportunity of listening, and I conclude on the basis that we would like to listen to what has been alleged against us.
Thank you. Any other statements, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, so we'll move on to item 7, which is public question time. Again, we have each person who wishes to ask a question, raise your hand, come to the microphone, and usually we allow 2 questions and continue around the room until we've run out of time, or if we don't run out of time, we then go back to the person who might want to ask a 3rd question. So would anyone like to ask questions? Yes, sir?
Yes, the question I would ask is the town's website facilities for hire booking system include the Bassendean Community Men's Shed facility?
I would have to ask Mr. Gibson.
You want the answer? No.
Well, I would actually say to you, sir, that on the website are a list of all the community groups, and I know that you're on that list, and I know that your direct contact is on that list. So I'm not sure about the booking system because normally the bookings go through to our staff who are on the 35 Orpeth Road, and they handle the bookings. Now, those bookings are probably mainly for the town's run facilities, but my recollection of the lease agreement with the men's shed, which is going back a couple of years now, so I can be corrected if I'm wrong, my recollection is that your organisation was going to facilitate and organise the bookings.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Can I ask the officers or whoever is the appropriate person to give us some advice as to when these complaints were lodged? What is the nature of the complaint against the shed?
Okay, so all questions are directed through myself as the presiding person, and I will ask Mr. Gibson to respond to that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's broadly as contained in the report. There's at least a suggestion from, in many cases, from councillors to staff that they have heard, and the report acknowledges that it's anecdotal, very much so. But much of the commentary has been provided and directed to staff by councillors, and presumably directed to councillors by members of the community. So given that there's at least a suggestion that groups are being denied access to the facility, staff have a requirement to bring this report to council for its consideration. Council is not required to change the process at all, but it's simply providing council with the opportunity to do so. In terms of the specifics of the groups, it would be inappropriate to divulge that in this forum, but I can assure you that there has been suggestion, at least over the last year, 18 months and beyond, from time to time, that groups are being denied access. Whether that is true or not, as I said, the report clearly acknowledges it's anecdotal, and it's open to council to make a decision on the strength of that or not.
My second question, Madam Mayor, is if when these suggestions, allegations were made, did you ever consider, in fact, contacting the Secretary or the President of the shed to have a conversation with them about them?
Again, Mr. Gibson.
Through Madam Mayor, I understand there has been conversations between the club's community development team and the men's shed regarding this matter specifically.
Regarding the allegations?
Mr. Brown?
Well, I've asked my two questions, I think. I'm
Yes,
happy to ask another one.
No. I'll just ask if anyone else would like to ask a question. Okay, thank you, ma'am. Would you like to come to the microphone?
Hello. Don't say my address, I can't remember. Lizzie Richardson, 24 Ilanthi Street, Bassendean. My question is, in terms of the community strategic plan and the Bassendean document, what is the town of Bassendean doing to create a vibrant town and precinct, and how are you going to support the businesses on Old Perth Road?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'll take that on notice. Thanks, Lizzie. And get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Ma'am, if you'd like to come to the microphone.
Suzanne von Teleski, 17 Reed Street, Bassendean. I'm just wondering if you've had communication with the shed, what date was it, please?
That would be with the, yes, it's with a certain department. They're not represented here tonight. So
how do you find out?
we will take the question on notice and the CEO will get back to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Okay. So we'll move on to item 8, which is deputations. Now, Ms. Richardson, you've got a deputation to provide tonight. If you'd come to the seat with the microphone so that you can be comfortable. Again, up to a maximum of 10 minutes, then I'll invite the councillors to ask you questions. Thank you. Yep. And again, Lizzie, the clock up there will give you an idea of your timeline.
Cool.
Thank you.
Hello. Right. Let me find what I'm going to say. Okay, so Bassendean Markets, we're coming up to 15 years on Old Perth Road, hopefully. We were originally set up at the west end of Old Perth.
So I'm going to get you to move your chair back a little bit. There we go, that's it.
We were originally set up on Old Perth Road to help support the businesses on the street and create a town square style location for the community to connect. Hosting our 5 morning markets sees approximately 10 to 12,000 attendees strolling the street. This is welcome and much needed, a needed boost of income for the local businesses in and around Old Perth Road. In 2003, we were forced to relocate off Old Perth Road due to significant increases in the traffic management. So we're desperately seeking the funding to sponsor the traffic management for the 2024 to 2026 morning markets. For many years, the town of Bassendean contracted the Bassendean Men's Shed to implement the traffic management. The Bassendean Men's Shed offered their services at a significantly reduced price compared to the usual traffic management companies. This year, the Bassendean Men's Shed have informed us they will no longer be able to do the traffic management, and we have looked for multiple quotes. They range from $20,000 to $30,000 for what we require. This change happening so quickly forced us to move to the Wilson Street car park. The traffic management, to return to Old Perth Road, we need the traffic management. We need the plan designed, and we need to have that implemented each month, having the lollipop man and all the people out there doing the signs. It's very expensive cost, but we think it's well worth it. You can't put a value on creating vibrancy on Old Perth Road. So we're seeking that the town cover the full amount for it. Funding this community event provides a significant opportunity to contribute to the vitality and vibrancy of the town. We work organisations and individuals to deliver activities with increased social participation. We promote social inclusion and strengthen connections in our community. Returning the event to Old Perth Road will be a great milestone for the town and the Bassendean residents, businesses and all the community groups involved. The Wilson Street location is not an ideal space for us. We're not going to always have it. We know that this land's been handed back to the Crown. We know that there's people down there surveying it. Every time we've been there, there's been more and more pegs, more and more markings, more and more paint going down. Something is brewing at Wilson Street. I know that things don't happen overnight, but one day we could get there and there could just be a fence across and it's getting bulldozed. So we can't rely on the fact that we're going to be there. Being in that area reduces our space. We can't fit people in. We can't fit the food trucks in. We have to reduce our stalls. It's just not ideal. But it was the best we could come up with in such a short time. But this has had a significant effect on the businesses on Old Perth Road. We know the businesses, not just up the top, but down the bottom, tell us on market day they see huge crowds walking up and down the street. They're feeling it all over Old Perth Road. And this is money that they really need, because on weekends, it's tumbleweeds. You don't see people walking up and down Old Perth Road. We align with all the documents that you've had, the strategic community plan, the Bassin Dream, the market scorecard, all these different things. So I just can't understand why this is being questioned, why we're having to work through this. It's just such a tricky thing. We know it's a lot of money, but it's something that I just don't think you can really put a value on it. Like it's something that the businesses need. And I just don't know what else the town is doing to support those businesses if we're not having these markets and events. Since our last meeting with the ACE committee, I've gone out and I've looked at many of the venues that we were told to look at. Ashfield, Swan Districts, Sandy Beach. There's issues with many of them. Swan Districts, we obviously can't use that. We've got the pitch. There's no way they're going to allow us to have 400 cars, food trucks, turning around, and we will absolutely shred that pitch. Same with Ashfield. They're not going to want that on their pitches. The other places are swampy. I've been out 2 or 3 times to most of those places this week, and there's just water everywhere. We have such terrible drainage in Bassendean. So it's just too much of a risk to be out on a lot of those places. Really, Old Perth Road up the top is pretty much our only location that we can really work with. Yeah, basically that's it. That's what I have to say. You know all the stuff, you've read it all before. We tick everyone's boxes. The residents want it. You know the residents want it. And I feel like this decision has been forced really quickly, and I think we should have more time to discuss it. And I guess even going to the ACE committee meeting recently, we don't get the opportunity to have these discussions. All of a sudden the councillors are having to vote on things where we haven't been able to have these back and forth conversations to actually discuss and get into the nitty gritty of why we can be places and why we can't be places and how it's going to work. So yeah.
Thank you, Lizzie. I appreciate, you can stay there because we'll have questions. I appreciate your deputation, and I do appreciate your passion as well. So I'll open it up to councillors first. I also have a couple of questions. I'll open up to councillors first who would like to ask a question. Councillor Ames, followed by Councillor Wilding.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, and and thanks, Lizzie, for coming in for another chat. I've got a couple of questions. Don't get me wrong, we're super keen to be able to make these markets ongoing. We've got to make sure they're viable for everyone involved, Town of Bassendean, and also including yourself as well. You want to do a business that doesn't flourish. Got a couple of questions for you. Towards the end of your statement or deputation, you said that there's been no opportunity for conversation between the markets and the town and the councils and so on and so forth. In 2 weeks, I haven't been contacted by you. So there's opportunity for you to be able to speak to a councillor or anyone around this table, including the CEO, at any stage. So for us to be able to continue to hear what you think about, have you had direct conversation with the community planning or our sport and recreation team or the CEO or anyone after the meeting that we had on the 5th of September?
Yeah, so leading up to the ACE committee meeting, I've had multiple conversations with the event staff, Manny Salvatore and Ricky. I had mentioned to them, well, how do we go about talking to the councillors, because they're all of a sudden making a decision on this information that's just put in front of them. They were really unsure if I was actually able to contact you, whether it's a bit of a, because I'm in an agreement with you, but I'm also a resident and I'm also a small business. So I think the staff were really unsure about how that worked and if it's crossing boundaries or not crossing boundaries. That's why when I came to that ACE committee meeting, I thought we were going to sort of have those conversations and have some questions and the back and forth, but that's really hard to do when you can only do a deputation and then be hit back with the questions after.
Sure, okay. You said that there, and this might have just been a value you picked out of the sky, 400 vehicles driving around the footy pitch at the Swan Districts Football Club. Why would there be so many vehicles driving around in any grassed area? Obviously, you've got a bit of a bump in and a bump out. But again, I would really like to hear your opinion as to why maybe Ashfield Reserve, that has got a highly built asphalt surface in the middle, is not suitable for a scale of markets that you would like to portray within the town.
Yeah. So in terms of the bump in and bump out, when you have an event, say Bassendean Market standard sort of 70 stalls, up to 15 food trucks, they don't just pop out of the sky. They have to come in, they have to have all their vehicles, their trailers, their most stalls, one little 3 metre marquee stall will generally have 2 or 3 vehicles with it. So you've got those vehicles coming in, stopping, parking, unloading, turning around several times, reversing, trying to get back out, driving off to park. Then we have the market, and then they have to come back in, drive in, do that again, park, turn around, and every time they're turning on the grass is just moving, and that's how it gets shredded up. But then also, so pretty much, 70 stalls, you're looking at about 400 car movements, and that's if they're good drivers, and trust me, some of them are pretty terrible. So there's a lot of the logistics behind the scenes that I don't think people in the community understand, that it's not just a simple thing. Like, there's a lot that goes on for the bump in and bump out that has to be considered when we're looking at these spaces. In terms of Ashfield, it's not for us. We will not be moving there. We would rather not have these markets than move to Ashfield. Multiple things have come out of that. So I've been down there 3 times. Every time this week I've been down there, had people asking for money, people aggressive, there's smashed glass everywhere, there's needles everywhere. It's not a safe place. I've asked multiple people in my community and friendships and things lately, and the same thing, everyone's going, oh God, why would you have that there? It's just not the right vibe. The other thing too is you've got the sports club and all these things happening. It's hard enough to get parks at sports grounds on days, let alone being in the middle of a winter sports season. The other thing as well is that when we used to have the Millie markets were in Bassendean, Ashfield, they were calling themselves the Bassendean food trucks, and that caused a big conflict between our name. People were confused, stallholders, food trucks, everyone was getting confused. We said to them, you're not in Bassendean, you're in Ashfield. So I can't now move Bassendean markets to Ashfield because I'm not going to rebrand again and go and call it Ashfield Markets. It just doesn't make sense. And for us, these markets were set to be in a central area because people come down from this side of the tracks, that side of the tracks, they walk up the street and down the street. As soon as we move out from a central place, we're going to lose a lot of the people that are walking and bringing their dogs and cycling and doing that sort of stuff. It's just going to create a separation. But at this stage, yes, there's a good little strip in Ashfield. That's the only thing that's going for it, to be honest.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Councillor Wilding?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks, Lizzie, for your deputation as well. Acknowledging all the logistical elements that you've just spoken about, I think from a council perspective, obviously we do see Bassendean as everyone. So I think for us, it's difficult to limit it just to that section. But particularly for me as an Eden Hill resident, I know a lot of people in Eden Hill are desperate for things out in that area. You mentioned exploring a couple of alternative sites. Have any of them been in Eden Hill, or does that hold any promise for that? Because we have a bunch of beautiful open spaces that we could certainly, obviously logistics pending, hopefully host something in.
The Eden Hill Mary Crescent's the one spot I didn't get to this week, but it's definitely on my to-do list. The sort of just chatting with friends that, live at Eden Hill, my kids are at Eden Hill Primary, was just a lot of concern about how that would go ground-wise, swampy-wise. Certainly the car park that is there next to the hall and the daycare and that is just really small. It wouldn't be enough, so we would have to be on the grass, but definitely on the to-do list to go and have a look at that. I've also had a look at Sandy Beach. I was quite surprised with how well it was compacted around the playground, but again, there is a lot of swampy areas, and then the fact that it's just the one road in and out. I've seen how busy that place gets just on a weekend, let alone with events and things. So, and I know the staff are looking into the approvals around how that would work on Sandy Beach.
Thank you. Lizzie, I'm interested in, because at the ACE committee there were a lot of ideas being thrown around, and it was, with Councillor Ames being the presiding person, I felt that he allowed a certain amount of informality for the discussion to proceed in a very proactive way. So, and I even know that a member of the public contributed some ideas from the benches. Given that part of the amendment from the ACE committee was to extend your term by 12 months to allow you to continue through the summer and autumn months down at the BIC, is it possible to look at an interim measure, discuss that with the staff, and perhaps trial different areas in the town? I know that that was an idea that was put to you because many of us would be really interested to see the expansion of the markets. And in Old Perth Road, because of the way it's contained, there doesn't seem to be much ability to expand the markets into something bigger and better. So that's a concept that I'd put to you. Have you actually thought about trialling different areas around the town over the next, if you have your 12-month extension, you come into the next winter period in 2024, that potentially you could trial other areas to see how it goes?
Yeah, so the thing with that is that markets, just as a 70-stall market, it's hectic, it's chaotic when you have arrival, and the stalls, they get really nervous about trying new places because they're worried about, are the crowd's going to come in, are they going to rock up and there's, 50% of the cars don't know where they're going, they haven't been there before, it's a nightmare, and a lot of the time it will put them off. Just moving to Wilson Street from Old Perth Road, we lost heaps of stalls, and a lot of them were concerned about being a new location, people wouldn't come, and just how hectic it would be trying to re-educate all the stall holders how to drive in, where they're going, where they're parking, who's going where. I love the idea of doing different events, probably more around the summer because Bassendean is really swampy, but probably smaller events rather than trying to bring in 70, 80 stalls and 15 food trucks and doing that. It's just too much. And to be honest, I do this event, I'm volunteering to do this for my community, and it would just not be worth my time unless there was funding like a lot of the other councillors do, with our funding events and supporting them and getting them going.
So do you have any statistics of the funding that's provided by other councils to market events? I'd be interested in knowing what those statistics might be.
Yeah, I can definitely get that for you. A lot of councils are backing events at the moment. Everyone seems to have come out of COVID and they're sort of, I feel like, doing the opposite of the town. They're actually wanting to get out. They want to connect people. They want to do stuff. They want to...
Lizzie, I would suggest to you that you have not the insights at the moment to understand the plans that are in place and going forward. But having said that, what we're interested in, the topic we're talking about today, is the markets and how to assist that to become bigger and better if possible. So I'll throw it over to other councillors who may have other questions at the moment. Councillor Polifka.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for coming in this evening. Look, I do agree with you that your residents, ratepayers, they want the markets, but the question is, do they want to pay for the markets? Do they want to incur that increased cost of the traffic control? And the funding for that would come from all parts of the town of Bassendean. So it would come, as Councillor Wilding had alluded to, from Eden Hill and similarly from Ashfield. So, I mean, we might find it a little difficult to ask the residents of Ashfield to contribute towards something if Ashfield is a no-go zone. In terms of the discussions that you've had, have you had an opportunity to actually speak to the soccer and the football clubs and see if, notwithstanding your concerns about the damage to the turf, whether that's something which they think could be accommodated?
Yeah, so I did start getting the ball rolling with Ashfield, but I've been a bit busy this last week doing other things. So it's definitely on the plan to have some conversations about that. But yeah, it's definitely, I've spoken with Bill Busby and he's connected me with the CEO of the... Yeah, so it's on the cards for a meeting.
In terms of that, look, it's understandable. I mean, everybody is busy from time to time. In terms of the time frame that's been put forward, that an agreement would be struck by the 15th of December, can something be achieved within that time frame?
Yeah, I think so. And we have to as well, because most of our store holders book 12 months ahead. And I'm already getting the questions now why they can only book up until April this year. Most of them are wanting to secure it. So if we don't have those dates available and get their payments booked in, they'll go to other events and then we'll lose them. And also, it's just that consistency that they want. So we need to have that decision done as soon as possible. We can't delay any further than Christmas.
In terms of the committee recommendation, obviously you are disappointed that the traffic management won't necessarily be paid for by the town. But the other point there about trying to reach an arrangement with the town, that's still an active thing which can occur. So is that where things are at the moment, that through those discussions a solution might be found? Yeah,
definitely. So I guess with this whole thing, to be honest, I didn't even know why we're here, because I've said this to the staff several times, we were only just starting to have our conversations about what our next agreement would look like, what we might want to need and how things might work. And then all of a sudden it's at an ACE meeting and it's coming here and it's being voted on and this and that. We've only had one meeting for about 20 minutes. So I don't think we're even ready to be having a lot of these discussions and votes.
But I guess to assist those that aren't on the ACE, in terms of the recommendation to council, or the committee recommendation to council, what aspects of that are we discussing? What is it that you would like to see changed?
Potentially, yeah, obviously our locations, our timings, funding, whether it's for traffic management or if we didn't have traffic management, whether there was support for bringing in some different things, like whether it's funding for entertainment, and that could be local entertainment. So talking about potentially, getting youth that are, getting into their music careers from Bassendean and helping to support them and giving them opportunity to perform, things like that, different artists doing things rather than getting outside artists and things like that. So obviously entertainment costs a lot of money, so there's different things that we would be looking for from the town if it wasn't the traffic management.
But you could work within the framework of the recommendation to council?
Within the time?
Well, yes.
Yeah, well that's what we're trying to get to. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Councillors, further questions? Councillor Ames?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I just want to follow on from Councillor Blifka's comment there. Are you aware of the notice of the resolution that happened at the ACE committee?
Yeah, about the EOI,
No, there's,
dates.
Yeah, so, am I?
if you'd read it out,
Yeah.
Councillor
I just
Ames.
pointed
No,
Yeah.
because that's because if you said you can work within it, well then we shouldn't be here. This will be passed. But I just want to make sure that you are aware of what the ACE committee is recommending to council for decision next week. So the resolution of 8.2 within the ACE committee meeting on the 5th of September was moved by Councillor Hamilton and seconded by Councillor Carter, that the committee recommends to council that it does not provide any funding for the purposes of preparation and implementation of the traffic management plan for the May and June 2024 markets in the event that the Wilson Street car park is unavailable. 2, extends the agreement beyond June 2024 to June 2025, subject to the town and the independent operator negotiating and coming to an agreement no later than 15th of December, which is what Councillor alluded to, as to alternative locations to stage the markets so as to not incur significant costs to the town and to the ratepayers. So that's what Councillor Biffle was talking about. Yes, we want the markets here, but are the residents willing to pay for it? Because if significant costs are incurred, well then the ratepayers have to pay for it. Point 3, should no agreement be reached by the 15th of December 2023, the council be advised and the Chief Executive Officer proceeds with a fresh approach to secure future staging of the markets within the town of Bassendean. So if you're aware of that and you can work within that, then that's great.
Yeah. Obviously, we don't want any of the first two recommendations. We want this funded and, we want that. But yes, by that date in December, we will know whether we are going to continue or whether we're walking.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah. We don't agree with the first two recommendations.
Even the one that, sorry Lizzie, just to clarify that, even the one that extends your agreement by an additional 12 months, you don't agree with that?
That's with no funding though, isn't it?
Okay. Councillors, further questions? So thank you, Lizzie. We'll finish with that item. And there are no other deputations that I'm aware of. So councillors, we'll go on to the reports, but with your indulgence, I will suggest that 9.1, which has a confidential attachment, I'm going to take that to the end of the meeting. We also have 9.11, which has confidential attachment, so those two will be held together. I'd also ask, the ICT strategy also has a confidential attachment, but I don't believe, I'm unsure that any councillor wants to actually ask questions on that item. So I'll leave that. I will ask the question at the beginning of that. And I will ask if there are any questions on the notice of motion before we go behind closed doors. So I am going to rearrange the agenda somewhat so that we don't inconvenience people coming in and out the chamber for confidential stuff constantly. So the first item that we're going to discuss is 9.2, use of community facility 1A Mayholman Drive, Bassendean. So I'd ask the, is it yourself or Mr Gibson that will be, Mr Gibson, if you'd like to address this item?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there's probably not a great deal to add, given that we've already had a couple of questions and statements about it, but I suppose a lot of the anecdotal information that we've had provided to us is indeed from councillors. I suppose given that there is at least a suggestion as to a lack of access, whether that's entirely true or not, there's certainly a suggestion. It is open to council to insert itself into the process and play a greater role. Similarly, it's open to council to do nothing and change nothing, but this report is simply not quite at the request of councillors, but it's certainly in response to feedback provided from time to time over the last couple of years, and simply providing council the opportunity to make a change if it so chooses.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. Councillors, questions? Councillor Plifka.
Thank you. Probably through yourself, Madam Mayor, to the Director of Planning. If we could turn to page 14 of the agenda. And this is the section concerning communication and engagement. If we park for one to the side for a moment things which are of an anecdotal nature, am I to understand from this that the men's shed has communicated to the town that it rejected a lave group?
Audience, this is a question and answer session now between the councillors and the administration. So if we can just be...
Through Madam Mayor, yes, that's indeed what it says.
So that is a communication that's come from the men's shed to the town, so there isn't any, that's not reliant on an undisclosed allegation or anything of that nature. This is something which has come from the men's shed.
Through Madam Mayor, yes, I understand that to be the case, but can confirm that during the week.
Okay, thank you. Following on from that, in terms of what's being proposed, so if we were to completely disregard everything of an anecdotal nature, which would deal with the concern about a denial of natural justice, the officer's recommendation, does that actually impair a right of the men's shed, or is that simply providing an interpretation as to their obligations under the existing lease?
Through Madam Mayor, our view would be the latter. We're not seeking to change the terms of the lease, and I'm not sure there would be an avenue to do so, even if we wanted to. As you rightly point out, this is just simply a number of procedural steps that would help interpret the existing lease clauses.
And so, in those circumstances, this is something which could be done absent a complaint of any sort whatsoever.
Through Madam Mayor, yes, quite correct, and I suppose in hindsight could have been built into the lease agreement if that was the desire at the time.
And the view would be that this mechanism would provide the men's shed with an avenue whereby they could essentially test the town's position as to whether action that they take is unreasonable under the lease?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, that's the broad intent, is to for the town to have some involvement in the process, but obviously still not trying to undermine the existing terms of the lease, given that they remain unchanged. As I said, just some procedural steps, as you say, to allow the town's comfort to be tested.
In a way, it's checking in at an early stage so that things don't escalate unduly. Okay, happy with that.
Councillor McLennan, you're wanting to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. I noted in the report there's a comment saying that the men's shed isn't under an obligation to be proactive in seeking to hire out the facility.
Sorry, I missed that.
Under the comment on page 14, it says there's no obligation for the lessee to be proactive in seeking to hire out the facility or part thereof. And I understand that that may not be explicitly part of the lease agreement. However, this is a significant community asset that funding was provided for on the basis that it would provide broad community benefit. It sounds like our current booking system doesn't include the men's shed because it's being managed by the community group. However, I'm wondering if there's scope for the town to still promote it so that our community groups are aware of the opportunity, and even though it may be booked through another system directly with the community group, there's a greater awareness of the fact that this facility is available for other uses.
Mr Gibson?
Through Madam Mayor, certainly.
Yeah, that would be great. And I have another question, if you don't mind. In the report, and I remember at the time when the facility was being developed and the lease was being developed, there was a lot of talk about wanting as many people to benefit from the facility as possible. Obviously, the men's shed to have primary use, but where there was additional capacity, other groups having that ability. And that's reflected here in the report where it refers to the Trust's project indicators. And the report seems to imply that there was an expectation that there would be reporting on those indicators. So it's things like membership, how the space is utilised, the number of individuals and groups, the utilisation rate as a percentage of the space. And I'm just wondering whether any of that data has been collected, and if so, I'd be really interested in seeing it.
Exactly my question. Mr Gibson?
Through Madam Mayor, we'd certainly have some of the data, but I can certainly check with staff during the week to see what other information we've got access to.
Could I have an ongoing question to that? Given that data looks like it should be collected annually, is there the ability to actually ensure that that comes through? Mr Gibson?
Through Madam Mayor, as per the previous answer.
Yeah. And my other question is, with this promotion of the space for utilisation by other community groups, my understanding and recollection of the lease is that the revenue from that would flow directly back to the men's shed. Is that correct? Mr White?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so 100% of the revenue would go back to the men's shed for any hire that is facilitated in that community space at the front of the shed.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct, and that's the reason why it's not currently available through the town's booking system, because the user group stands to benefit from the higher fees.
Okay. Further, Councillor Wilding?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Mr Gibson. Does the town, this might be a Mr White question actually, does the town have any other leases with a similar arrangement in terms of the user group controlling bookings and such?
Thank you for turning your microphone off, Councillor Whiting. There may be, but probably not identical, but might have to take that on notice and come back with some further information for councillors next week.
Councillor Polifka?
Yeah, just a...
Sorry. Councillor Polifka, we'll let Councillor Wilding ask her other question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr White, for the answer. With regard to the clauses that are proposed to be put in, or not proposed to be put in, but I suppose the interpretation of the clauses, rather than singling out one particular lease, is this something that we could build into an ongoing process as an expectation of any lease with this sort of arrangement?
Through Madam Mayor, quite possibly yes, but I suppose that's based on the assumption that we have other leases that provide for this functionality. I'm not entirely sure we do. There's one that might meet that criteria, but we can check that during the week. But if hypothetically there was another lease with another group for another facility that had the same or similar clauses, it might not be unreasonable to adopt a similar approach.
Thank you. Councillor Carter?
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. I've just heard tonight that it's so-called it's councillors that have provided this feedback. Am I correct?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, part of the feedback has been provided by councillors.
Then councillors who haven't provided feedback, what do they do if they're asked point blank by members of the community if they've provided this feedback and they haven't?
Yes. Okay. Can I answer that? We're a conduit. As councillors, we're elected as the conduit between the community and the administration. And as mayor, I have definitely had feedback. I'll admit to that. Feedback has been from women who want to have a maker's space at the men's shed. They have looked at what's happening in Bayswater and have been frustrated because there has been little appetite to enable that. And these groups need to be enabled. They need to be gently fostered into spaces where they can be active. So that's one communication I've had from some ladies. I do understand, having heard from another councillor as well, that there has been some issues. I also understand that we are really unique in Bassendean in that we have, or did have, I'm not sure of the status at the moment, but we did have 2 registered men's shed. One was the May Holman Drive men's shed, and the other one I think Mr Brown is fairly familiar with, because initially in the early days when the men's shed were hunting for a site, they were a collaboration with another group that are established in the church facility up in Hanwell Way. So that's another group that were initially looking for a better space than where they are at the moment. So these are groups that have come to the town. Sometimes they contact councillors looking for funding to start these things off somewhere else because they feel like they can't find a space. As a council, we have spaces, and the men's shed is a community space. It was always built to be a community space with the men's shed as the primary occupiers. I will not take that away from the men's shed, that we always wanted you to have a home, and that's what's happened. But in the meantime, we have other community groups that have no spaces at all to work. So this is why this has come to the town. It's come to councillors, community members. Any community member in this room, any community member outside this chamber can always pick up the phone and speak to a councillor. They can always speak to me when I'm going shopping. They can speak to any of us at any time of the day or night. And sometimes we provide that feedback back to the administration, and maybe not any time of the day or night. So, sorry. Yes, I am thinking of the person who rings us at 11 o'clock at night. Sorry about that, councillors. Anyway, we will go back to questions now, councillors. I hope that answered your question, Councillor Carter. That as a councillor, if you have not provided such feedback, you just honestly say to the community, sorry, that didn't come from me. Councillors, any further questions? Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking at my questions. I think Councillor McLennan and a few of the other councillors covered all the questions that I have on this one. Okay, so councillors, we'll move on to item 9.3, which is the draft amended local planning policy, town centre. So, Mr Gibson.
Through Madam Mayor, the purpose of this report is for Council to consider the draft amended LPP1, which would effectively replace the existing LPP1 and LPP10. This is an interim measure for the period between now and when the town has a precinct structure plan for the town centre. Importantly, it will contemporise the town's policy settings for the town centre by referring to the 2021 master plan rather than the development concepts from the mid-2000s which provided for development on Bick Reserve amongst other locations.
Councillors, we'll just wait a moment. Okay, so councillors, do we have questions? Councillor McLennan.
Thank you. Just acknowledging that the previous document was a much broader document than a small policy. I'm just wondering if Mr Gibson can please identify if there are any significant changes to what it would produce compared to that previous document, if that makes sense.
Through Madam Mayor, I suppose the last document wasn't so much a policy as an exercise in illustration. The provisions within it were not worded as a normal policy code or language. It was sort of spoke about the principles of urban design, that sort of thing. It didn't actually have firm policy provisions and requirements that would enable a meaningful assessment of an application for development approval. So, as you can see, for the contemporary one, it's quite a bit shorter, but the provisions are far more succinct and punchy and specific. Importantly, it still refers by reference, as opposed to by having an attachment within it, to the council adopted town centre master plan. So in terms of assessing an application for development approval, there's the provisions within the policy itself, but there's also that extra layer that goes beyond that, which is the council adopted master plan. So in terms of what applications could be facilitated, it's probably much the same, but this would not be the only tool that we'd be using. We'd obviously be using the master plan along with this. We've also got our scheme, whether it's LPS 10 or 11, depending on the timing. And we've also got SPP 7.3 and the design review panel as well. So, as I've said previously, we've got enough tools in the bag to actually assess applications for development. And as with any sort of town centre context, there's going to be, there's probably a balance to be struck between providing guidance and being too restrictive. You want to provide, I suppose, just enough guidance to keep things on the straight and narrow by and large, but you don't want to press down too hard such that you're being restrictive and sort of undermining any creative flair that an architect or an urban designer might produce, or a design review panel might consider appropriate. So, long way of answering a short question, but yes, certainly this policy position will be a meaningful improvement on what we've got now.
Thank you. And just to further clarify, I appreciate that the previous document, the reason I didn't know how to describe it was because I agree it wasn't really a policy as such, but there was quite a lot of description in there around design elements for the town centre. And I was just really seeking to understand if there was anything that we needed to have highlighted to us that might not be in the new proposed policy that was included in the description in the previous LPP one.
Through that, I mean, nothing that sort of comes to mind, but can certainly compare the two documents during the week. Some of, as the report says, that the relevant provisions, or what the provisions the staff consider to be relevant, are certainly extracted out and put in the new policy. Those that were more, I suppose, vague and discussionary were left out because we think there's enough of that type of information in the master plan, and the master plan is 20 years more recent. And I suppose what the town has that it didn't have in the mid-2000s was SPP 7.3, as well as access to the design review panel. So from a staff point of view, we're not at all uncomfortable with having a more succinct policy.
So clearly the officer's recommendation would see the draft policy replace the town centre strategy and guidelines as prepared by Harm-Charlie in 2008, correct? That's that was attachment 9.3.1. That's the intent.
That's correct.
Yes, right, okay. So I know that you weren't here during the Harm-Charlie, but I do understand that that was a significant document built upon a great deal of community consultation. So my question is, why not update that document rather than create a very short policy? I'm just curious about, because, yeah.
Through Madam Mayor, to be quite frank, it wasn't a good policy. In terms of providing for development assessment guidance, it does not hit the mark. Amongst other things, it provides for residential development all over Vic Reserve. So I don't think anyone here would contend that it actually reflects the contemporary view of council. And for that reason, staff are of the view that it is better to start again.
Okay. Councillors, Councillor McWilliam.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, Mr. Gibson, it's interesting to me. This is sort of smacks to me of environmental crime prevention by environmental design, and I'm no stranger to this. And yeah, I think that being able to see into buildings as well as out. Sorry, what am I doing?
Questions?
Yes,
Statements.
I'm getting to that. I'm asking: is that what we're looking at? Is it more about? It's about an aesthetic thing, but it's also about a crime prevention through environmental design. So you need a line of sight.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's both, and it's car parking, it's public realm, it's setbacks. It's not limited to SEPTED principles, although that is an important thread that runs through it. That is not the sole driver.
Okay. Thank you. I don't think SEPTED should ever be the sole driver, because you can end up with some pretty ugly sort of bars and things like that. Not where you get a drink though. Yeah, thank you very much.
Councillors, further questions?
Yeah, I'll just have one. Thanks, Madam Mayor. If you can say yes.
Yes.
Thanks, mate. And through you to Mr. Gibson, I've just sort of danced between the two documents, and there's no real reference to roller shutters. Obviously, we've been speaking about, Councillor McGowan just said about roller shutters and aesthetics and so on and so forth. The obvious policy would have something in there that relates to opaque or obscure window treatments. We don't have anything just boarded up and locked in.
Are you suggesting the new policy doesn't have the reference to roller shutters?
Correct.
Councillor, if I can draw your attention to clause 1.4, which says ground level facades to non-residential premises shall have a minimum of 80% clear glazed area at ground level and not be obstructed by the use of obscure glazing, tint, roller shutters, signage, shelving or decals.
Very good. On what page is that, Mr. Gibson, of that attachment?
Page 2 of 3, through you, Madam Mayor.
While you're looking for that, if I could ask another question. Mr. Gibson, the reference to the precinct structure plan, and I know that everyone gets sick of me asking about the precinct structure plan and timelines, but obviously the precinct structure plan, which is yet to be developed, will have all the granular detail that would guide good quality development or appropriate development in the town centre. How do we bridge the gap between this draft policy and that granular detail? So with the Harmshali Town Centre Strategy and Guidelines, despite sections, and I will agree with you, wholeheartedly agree with you, that there are sections in that document that are well out of date, but there are other sections that provide a significant amount of, as I think Councillor McLennan suggested, the facade and design elements of the buildings as well. So how do we fill that gap between when we have now and the structure plan when that's created, which I believe in the past you've said will be about 2 years?
Through you, Madam Mayor, this policy is that gap. This policy is supported by the Council Adopted Town Centre Master Plan, SPP 7.3, and design review in accordance with the Council Adopted Design Review Panel policy. So between those documents and frameworks, that is the bridge to the gap between now and the precinct structure plan.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Councillors, further questions?
Just following on from Director Gibson's comment, in terms of that, I suppose, conversion of that document into this policy, is there any scope for councillor involvement? Is there any discretion, or is it just a process of converting what already exists into this document?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I suppose the council involvement would be to adopt it or not next Tuesday, ideally. If council is not satisfied with the draft amended LPP1, it is not obliged to proceed as recommended, in which case existing LPPs 1 and 10 will remain as is. Alternatively, if council were broadly comfortable with the draft amended document but wanted changes, that could be prosecuted via an amendment next week.
Are there, areas that you could identify where council had scope which didn't run contrary to our existing decisions?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So where we've passed in the past, we've passed these different instruments, and now the process seems to be that this is a stopgap measure, which is based on what is already in existence. is there scope for us? I mean, are there some aspects of the policy which, in converting it from those pre-existing documents, that councillor there would be a range of options, or is it simply a process of translating what already exists into this policy?
Through you, Madam Mayor, as I said before, it's certainly open to council to do whatever it feels appropriate with its policy settings. That's one of the key roles of council, is to set its policies. Staff have simply, in the aftermath of the council adoption of draft LPS 11, sought to get a quick win in terms of meeting one of the recommended actions of the adopted local planning strategy, and that was to ultimately revoke LPP 1, but that is predicated on us having a precinct structure plan. Given that that is going to be 2+ years away, the options are to leave everything as is and just get through as best we can with the framework dating back to the early and mid-2000s, or we can seek to contemporise it for the next 2 or so years, but that decision ultimately rests with council.
But if it was council's intention to give effect to the LPS 11 as passed, then the process would be to adopt the recommendation.
Through Madam Mayor, I suppose LPS 11 and these LPPs are somewhat independent. They sort of work in concert, but in terms of councils dealing with them, they are independent. Council's already made the decision of LPS 11. That's done. That's with the department. What we're dealing with now is LPP 1 and 10, and just because council adopted the draft scheme does not oblige it to do anything with these policies. Staff are very much of the view that it's a good idea and have recommended as such, but if council wants to let sleeping dogs lie, it's open to council to do that.
Thank you.
If I could have a follow-up question on that. If, as you say, sleeping dogs are left to rest, if there was a development application, it would be assessed on the current policy 1 and 10, isn't it? That's correct, isn't it? Yes.
Through Madam Mayor, it would be assessed against the suite of policies that were applicable at the time.
Yep, okay, thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Okay, so we'll move on to, excuse me, 9.4, which is draft amended local planning policy 12, residential development and fences. And we know that fences are always a popular topic. So, Mr. Gibson, I believe this is you again.
Through Madam Mayor, this report, we're not too dissimilar to the last one, and it's for council to consider a draft amended LPP 12, which relates to residential development. The sole operative change is to formally embed reference to the town's character study, and you'll see that on page 2 of 6 of the attachment, so as to make it clear that that document will be used to assess streetscape character compatibility. So, long story short, the town already uses that because it is a relevant consideration, but for the sake of transparency, it's appropriate to embed that into the policy.
Questions, councillors? Questions, councillors? Councillor Plivka.
Yes, so page 3, I think it is, of that policy 12, and that catch-all that you mentioned, Director Gibson, I think that may go some way to answering my question. But in terms of fences, we seem to have taken the approach of specifying what wouldn't be a deemed to comply fence. Does that mean that any other sort of fence is permissible? And if so, is it then tempered by that catch-all that you've just mentioned?
Through Madam Mayor, if you're referring to the bottom of page 3 of 6.
I think it's the top of page 4, yeah, and it goes over to the top of page 4, yes.
So what council has previously done, and this is not proposed to change as part of this proposal, is to effectively amend the state government's deemed to comply provision and substitute in its own deemed to comply provision as an alternative to provide a different scope as to what is deemed acceptable. That is not proposed to be changed as part of this process, but there's certainly open to council to take the opportunity while we're here amending the policy to make other changes it considers appropriate.
And just in terms of one of the, well, there's two other things. One other one is the small outbuildings. The wall height on those can be 2.7 metres, whereas when we go to large outbuildings, that's restricted to 2.4 metres. Now, I know some of the councillors could probably reach their hand up and touch a 2.4 metre ceiling. Is there a reason for reducing the size for the larger building?
Through Madam Mayor, we'd have to take that on notice. That's taken verbatim from the R codes, so there may be a reason, but we'd have to check for that.
And the final one was with, I think we're talking about what could be placed in the street, in the front setback. There was a mention of garages and carports. I know some suburbs seem to have an approach where they almost have these carports right on the footpath. Would that policy allow that sort of thing? So where you had a carport as opposed to an enclosed garage, that people could put that a lot further into the front setback?
Through Madam Mayor, yeah, broadly the R codes provides that if it's a carport and it's open, it can come closer to the street than an enclosed garage that has a door, and that's provided for in the policy. Similarly, the design principle assessment would generally favour carports being closer to the street as opposed to garages.
Okay, excellent. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a curiosity question. It actually has almost no relevance to the officer recommendation, but one of the sections, C5.3.9, relates to stormwater and the conditions if you can't retain that stormwater on site. Given technical abilities these days, what conditions would stop stormwater from being retained on site these days?
Through Madam Mayor, it could be high water table, could be clay soils, could be both.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, further questions? Yes, Councillor Plivka.
Following on from your highlighting that stormwater section, would that provision take into account things such as where we might have alternatives to hard surface driveways, where we might have I think the commercial name for it is geotech or geotex, so where you might have a permeable driveway, and would that be consistent with what we're attempting to do there?
Through Madam Mayor, it would be something that could be contemplated. It'd obviously be up to the applicant to demonstrate that the use of a semi-permeable driveway was actually meeting the deemed to comply provision.
Okay, great, thank you.
Further questions, councillors? Okay, so councillors, we'll move on to the next one, which is 9.5, the ICT strategy review. This is one item that had a confidential attachment, but councillors, I'd ask if you're not going to go to questions on that item, we'll have the questions done publicly, so up to you. Do we have questions? Do we have, sorry, Mr. White, I ignored you completely, apologies. Would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I won't go on for too long, given the documents have been circulated to councillors, and we had a workshop on this last week. Happy to take questions, and essentially, I guess, just to highlight that the essential, in a nutshell, the big change is moving on from a focus on network stabilisation and security into forward planning in preparation for, hopefully, looking at a new enterprise resource planning platform for the town. But happy to take questions if there are any from councillors. Thank you.
Councillors? I think this might be one more for the CEO, but given our recent efforts to advocate for a sector-wide solution and collaboration, would you be happy for an amendment to include that we continue those advocacy positions for sector-wide collaboration on this?
Definitely. I don't think it's, to be honest, Madam Mayor, I don't think it's required. I think the two things are on separate tracks and they're heading in the direction. We may not benefit from any sector-wide changes, and we're forging our own path, but we're 2 years away from going to tender, and the reason we're doing all the work now is whatever happens with the other train track that's heading towards that sector-wide solution is we'll have our architecture designed and exactly know what our processes are, so we can jump to that solution if it's available quicker and cheaper, or we can we move on down our own path. But if we don't continue on this path, we're going to be left behind and probably not be able to take advantage of either.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woods. Okay, councillors, if there's no further questions on this one, we will move on to 9.6, which is Councillor ICT Policy Review. And Mr. White again.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just very briefly, Council adopted this policy 2 years ago, so it's up for review this month. And we're just proposing one fairly minor change to the policy, which is essentially just to remove some dollar figures that were in there should councillors choose to purchase town allocated devices at the end of their particular term in favour of a market rate, which also allows, I guess, the capability or the capacity for councillors to do so at the end of a term of less than a full term, and currently the policy specifies that that option's only available serving a full term. So that's the only change that we're proposing. Thank you.
Councillors, any questions? Can I ask a question, Mr. White? And again, I appreciate it's only a very minor change to the document, but it did get me thinking, for staff, do the administration provide training to the staff on some of these new devices? And the only reason I ask is because if you do, some of the councillors could definitely benefit from that training as well, if it's available.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. I think not so much training on devices, it's more training on software programs.
Okay.
So when we would implement a new particular software application to perhaps improve business efficiency, then we would roll out a training program in relation to that. However, our ICT staff are certainly available to sit down with councillors and take councillors through any sort of IT related issue that you might have, whether that's a software application or whether that's in terms of the usage of the device hardware itself. So we're more than happy to do that.
Thank you. Okay, no further questions on that one, councillors? Okay, so we'll go to 9.7, which is the adoption of the quarterly report for the period ended 31st of July 2023. And I believe this will be yours, Mr. Woods.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I commend to Council the report as written. We've probably a bit remiss in not having the report, an early report brought to you. This is a 6-month quarterly review, so it's incorporating the last 2 quarters, which brings us nearly up to date, and we won't be far off bringing one before Christmas to get us to the end of the next quarter. So I did receive some questions today from Councillor McLennan, which I've circulated this afternoon. Just about all of those have been answered, but if there's any more questions, we're happy to take them. The relevant officer for each section of the corporate business plan will do their best to answer those now. Thank you.
Councillors? Councillor McLennan?
First of all, thank you for taking the time to answer my numerous questions today. I just want to follow up on a couple of them. So one of the questions was in relation to item 1.5 and also has overlapped with 7.3, which was the secondary plan for Sandy Beach Reserve. So I've seen that that's now been listed as monitor or review. And part of the reason for my question was around the original intention for that project, which was to really honour the Indigenous significance of that site. And unfortunately, as part of the first iteration, that wasn't a big feature, but we had planned for that to still come later. The comment that I had in response to the question was that there's no available budget to incorporate these elements and stories in the project at present. But I'm just wondering, I'm not on the ACE committee, but there was the agenda item about public art as part of the ACE committee, and there were recommendations for public art in various locations around the town. And I'm curious as to whether this was considered as part of that discussion.
I might defer that to somebody else that was dealing with that actual item. Thank you, Mr. Gibson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't recall it being discussed specifically, but it would be quite inappropriate to use those funds at Sandy Beach. I've made this comment to councillors in the past. These funds are collected from developers pursuant to conditions of development approval, and there is a genuine and legitimate expectation that they would be spent in close proximity to the subject site. So the item that went to the ACE committee recommended a series of locations that were appropriately proximate to the source, and the comment was made in the report quite specifically that that is not necessarily the only location for public art, and if council wants more public art, that's all well and good, but it needs to fund it.
Mr. Gibson, following on from that, I note one of the recommendations relates to two pieces from the ACE committee, relates to two pieces of artwork at Sandy Beach. And there was a request for the costing of decommissioning. If that decommissioning came back at a very low price, could it be open to the ACE committee to allocate some of that funding that was going to be put towards upgrading that piece of artwork towards the aspirations that Councillor McLennan has outlined?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not sure if you want to cover this now or the ACE committee, but in any event, I believe that it was only $5,000 that was being committed for the Tree of Life. The removal of the art is indeed no direct cost. There's opportunity cost associated with staff time, but it wouldn't involve a significant direct cost to remove the art. But as per the committee recommendation 9 on page 36 of 44, the nominal allocation for the maintenance of the Tree of Life piece was only $5,000.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Councillors, further questions? Councillor McLennan? No? Okay. Any other further questions, councillors? Okay. So we'll move on to the next item, which is 9.8, the Bassendean Local Emergency Management Committee meeting on the 30th of August. Again, Mr. Gibson, okay. This one's pretty straightforward. Councillors, are there any questions on this one? Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, which is 9.9, the ACE committee meeting on the 5th of September. Mr. Gibson, did you want to talk to this one?
Through you, Madam Mayor, only briefly to say that the purpose of this report is obviously to consider the recommendations of the committee that the committee made at its recent meeting held on the 5th of September. It is noted that two of the recommendations on page 36 either directly or indirectly refer to an attachment, and I'm not sure they made it through with the agenda package, so we will make sure those attachments are provided during the week.
Thank you. Thank you. I was eager for one of those attachments to have a look at the map, and I do believe that the councillors who are not part of the ACE committee would benefit from seeing those maps. Okay, councillors, are there any questions on this item? Councillor McLennan?
Thank you. And the map is available online anyway, so we have been able to access it with the committee agenda. Just a couple of things. Now, I don't pretend to fully appreciate the needs of the markets, but I was wondering whether, given that we need to have a space that's not going to be affected by the wet weather, whether there would be any worth in investigating whether the large car park by Bassendean train station, which isn't utilised on the weekends hardly at all, would be a space that the PTA would be willing to allow the markets to be held on?
Thank you, Councillor McLennan. That's one we didn't think of at the ACE committee, so thank you for that one.
Is that something we could maybe get some advice on?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, that's something we could reach out and ask. They're not that easy to deal with sometimes, to be honest, but we can always ask the question. But, you know, while we've got Lizzie in the room, before we go to that trouble, I would really like to know whether that would be acceptable before we start trying to deal with the bureaucracy.
I have actually sent them an email,
Okay.
I haven't heard anything back,
So if we were to pursue it on your behalf, you would be okay if that was an outcome we could reach?
I think that basically is safe at work.
Thank you.
Just another question. Most of this seems to be dependent upon the Wilson Street car park not being available, and I appreciate that it's less than ideal, but equally Aldworth Road is less than ideal for lots of reasons. Have we had any indication that there's going to be movement on that site any time in the next 12 months to 2 years? Because I think, you know, we'd love to see movement on that site, but just because there's been some surveying happening, in my mind that doesn't equate to imminent development. I would imagine at the earliest it would still be at least 2 to 3 years before we'd see anything start on that site.
Through Madam Mayor, that's all quite fair. There have certainly been investigations being undertaken by the DPLH and surveyors and the like on behalf of the DPLH. They are continuing. I follow up with them from time to time, and they are going through the process. But as you can appreciate, it does take time. The process from here, as we understand it, is that once the DPLH is comfortable that it is appropriate to divest, it will be part of their state land investment program, and it will go through a process to be on-sold to a developer, presumably. So, in all likelihood, there will not be meaningful changes to that landscape for at least a couple of years. I suppose what may well change is the formalities in terms of the relinquishment of the management order. Now, that won't have any on-the-ground impact, but of course it will change who owns and manages the site. Again, that in of itself isn't a fatal flaw, because it may well be that the management order's extinguished and it is owned in fee simple by the department, but the department may well enable it to be used for market purposes or any other purpose until such time as it's required for development. But in terms of definitive timeframes for each of those steps, we don't really know.
Councillor McLennan and then Councillor Polifka.
Thank you. I understand that when the men's shed first began undertaking the traffic management for the town, that the town may have supported the training and so on for the men's shed to be able to conduct that service. I'm wondering whether it would be feasible for us to see if there's another community group that might now be interested in having the same kind of agreement, so that on an ongoing basis there was a community group benefiting from that income, but also at a reduced cost to the town and to the operator.
We can definitely explore that with the negotiations with Lizzie prior to December 15th, but I might also ask Phil to comment on traffic management planning and whether legislation has changed, so that is it any harder now to engage volunteers to do traffic management given the litigious nature of government?
Thanks, Cameron, and through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, that space has changed significantly over the past 12 months, specifically. So the community groups, such as the men's shed, would be more reluctant to undertake this type of activity, and I think we need to consider this in a great more detail than what it was considered in the past, with the possible litigation that we're open to at the moment. And we're going through that. We've been going through that internally for a while as well, and it is significantly different from what had occurred in the past with the Bassendean men's shed.
Councillor Polifka.
Yeah, just following on from the discussion about the Wilson Street site, for Director Gibson, the relinquishment of the management order, has that happened yet?
Through Madam Mayor, Council resolved in September last year to agree to the relinquishment, but it hasn't formally changed.
Okay, and so up until the point where that occurs, then we would know everything that was happening on that site, but once that does occur, then the state wouldn't have an obligation to necessarily inform us. I mean, they might do so, but they wouldn't be required to do so, would they?
Through Madam Mayor, quite correct. If they're the owner, they don't need to tell us everything they're doing, but thus far they have been quite good with the communication.
Okay, thanks.
Councillors, further questions? Okay, so we'll move on to item 9.10, which is the Audit and Governance Committee meeting held on the 8th of September. And Mr White, I don't know if you have anything to say about this one?
Only very briefly again, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just really to point out that while the committee considered 4 items which are listed in the report, there's only a couple of decisions that we'd be seeking council to make, and they're in turn in relation to the sundry debt item. One's just to note the exercise of the administration under delegated authority, and the other is to write off a debt that exceeds that dollar amount that's able to be done administratively. Thank you.
And of course, councillors, the confidential attachments have that information, clearly not for the public viewing about who those debtors are. So if you have questions, please be mindful of that. Questions, councillors? No, okay. So councillors, the remaining 2 items, 9.1 and 9.11, are both confidential items. I will ask before we go behind closed doors, there's 2 notices of motion. One is 11.1, mature trees on private property, from Councillor McLennan. And the other one is 11.2, Bassendean Caledonian Soccer Football Club lease and other community leases. Councillors, do you have any questions on either of those? Well, we'll do 11.1 first. If you've got questions, we'll deal with them now, and then we'll go behind closed doors after we've dealt with those. If not, we can leave it till next week. Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to any of the officers that would like to answer the question. Firstly, Councillor McLennan, was this just provided just today? Had the officers had the opportunity to review this?
It was provided last month, I believe, and it's been refined, and so that's how it was included in the agenda published last week.
Sure. Is there an opportunity that there might be a ballpark figure in regards to the cost to associate the audit for the notice of motion?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no. The only way to test it is to actually prepare a scope, and that's quite difficult, given it's not an area that we've been in before, but there's other complex issues around trying to find a qualified arborist if one is required. There's also the way that it might go about. It might be that we use aerial surveys in the first instance, which if we could obtain LiDAR data, which is already available, which is only, maybe if there was LiDAR data which is 12 months old, that might be suitable for us to do a desktop audit ourselves, which would be quite cheap. But if we need to go out and do a walk the street and with an arborist or staff to take photos, and then that opens up other issues around staff and arborists being on private property. So the simple answer is no. That's why we need to go through an RFQ process and test the market. Having said that, we've failed on 2 occasions to be able to employ our own arborist recently. So the tree canopy across the metro and the Peel region is a real thing at the moment, and every council seems to be investing in these skill sets. So if we're going to solve that issue, I think we're going to need to substantially increase our pay rate to attract somebody to, or we need to go to contract and just pay on an hourly basis.
Councillors? Councillor Plivka?
Just following on from that, Mr. CEO, in terms of a request for quotation, I know we've got pretty rigid ways about engaging people. Is this something which could be done by university students or somebody of that nature? I mean, is there that sort of skill set out there and a willingness to undertake this sort of work?
Look, I think it's possible. I think in my comments I'm actually stating that, and I understand from the Walga conference this week that we're only days away from receiving legal advice to the sector, and I think we should be predicating that whether we proceed in expending ratepayers' money on this type of audit based on the fact that what is our success rate to actually be able to successfully prosecute once we do have this significant tree register in place before we spend any more money. So I'm hoping, and that's why Councillor McLennan's notice of motion, the one we've ended up on, is quite well written, because it's not committing us to do something right now, on the basis that we will have more information, and then the RFQ will come back, and that will inform the budget workshops that should commence about March. So we should be in a better position come March to understand what the cost is and what our ability to enforce these significant tree registers.
But in terms of the other option you mentioned, the notice of motion refers to mature trees and significant trees. Now, I understand significant trees doesn't necessarily relate to a particular size. There are other factors which could cause something to be significant rather than the canopy area or the height of the tree. In terms of that desktop audit, I mean, if we were to try and capture, I suppose, as many of these larger trees as possible sooner rather than later and at the lowest cost possible, if there was a resolution which specified trees of a particular canopy area, that would facilitate a fairly rapid desktop approach.
Yeah, I'm still not sure. My advice would be to wait till we understand. I still don't, in my mind, I don't see the evidence out there that says without this we're going to keep losing trees, because I don't think we're losing trees. So I think the real question is to go, what is the evidence that you base this on in the first place?
Yeah, and I suppose, but if the decision were made in order to make it as cost effective and as quick as possible, then potentially this notice of motion could be, I suppose, amended to give quantitative descriptions which could be easily measured, so that we would then capture as many trees as possible without having to, I suppose, refer to the other assessments which might relate to a significant tree, because a tree could be small but it might have some history attached to it, or it might just be a slow growing tree. But in order to, I suppose, if the endeavour here is to minimise the loss of canopy, then we could potentially, as a first step, I suppose, capture as many of the trees which are larger by canopy area, and that could be done by desktop if that is the decision of council.
I think that's, to be honest, that's a common sense approach. That's the approach we will probably be taking, because that's what you can deal with a LiDAR survey from the air. You can deal with the size of the tree and the canopy. The other issues, I think, are too subjective anyway, so you're better off for a desktop audit just to do what you can physically see.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Any further questions? And 11.2, I don't believe the lease document was in any attachments. It would have been confidential anyway.
Yeah, it's also, Madam Mayor, that the lease document hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Only one term is, I don't think that lease is relevant in its entirety. I think the issue is whether it's a 5+5 or it's a 2 because of the reasons stated. So I think the notice of motion as written is significant enough to make a decision.
Okay. Councillor McLennan.
Thank you. There's the officer comment saying there's no objection to the proposed motion. I'm wondering, though, whether the Caledonian Club has had any conversations with the town and what their position might be.
Caledonians are seeking a request to have, why hasn't it been signed and when will it be signed? I think, I can't speak, I'll hand over to Director of Community Planning, Luke Gibson, in a minute, because I think his team has been in conversation. I think the thing to note is the fact that I think the notice of motion is a good balance between making sure that the club has got what is going to be a cheaper lease for the next 2 years while we sort through the new community leasing framework, and there may even be some benefit for the club at the end of that lease, that 2-year period, because it might actually be that with the redevelopment clause and other things within the lease, it might benefit all of our clubs.
I guess what I was seeking to understand really is whether that conversation has been had with the club so that they can understand the rationale and the potential benefits to them.
I might ask Mr Gibson to comment.
Through Madam Mayor, I'm not sure exactly of every conversation, but yeah, certainly can echo the CEO's comments about the conversations that I'm certainly aware of was more chasing up the lease that they were expecting to receive.
If I may add to that, Rebecca from the club has been in contact with me. I have spoken to her on the phone, and I have sent her a copy of the agenda and copy and pasted the notice of motion and the reasons and the officer's recommendation. So she would be in receipt of all of that information now. So, okay. Now, before we go behind closed doors, I just want to touch base with the CEO in regards to 9.1, the draft amended land asset strategy. It was my intent to take that behind closed doors because of the confidential nature of the attachment. I just want to make sure that that is something that the administration are happy to do.
Yes, Madam Mayor, we are, because
Yep.
we are talking about sale and disposal.
Yep.
I might also ask that perhaps, given that we have the HR manager in the room, whether there was an appetite to do with 9.11 first. So if you think that the HR manager is not required to provide any technical advice to 9.11, then I might ask him to take leave.
I don't believe there is any necessity for the HR manager to provide advice on this item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks, Graham.
Sorry, I should have realised earlier.
That's right, I should have said
Yes. So we'll deal with 9.1 first. We'll go behind closed doors. And so I'll ask members of the audience if you could leave now. Thank you very much for your attendance, and have a lovely evening. And I'll wait for the recording to be turned off before we proceed to 9.1.